Hey everyone, welcome back to Nothing But Anime. This is part 8 of the What If Deku Became a Teacher series. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more awesome content. Now let's dive right in. Once Izuku had managed to calm Osamu down, he asked the boy if knew anyone that would like help learning anything. The boy said he would get his friends and ran back into the building. He waited a few minutes before Osamu and a small group of 6 his age followed him out of the building. Izuku introduced himself as Deku-Sensei and led the group to the veranda, then went on to help them with their math, science, and spelling. He enjoyed teaching them, and Izuku probably loved teaching kids the most because they always had questions. When the 4 hours of teaching were done, Izuku promised to be back to help Osamu with finding someplace to get his EMT training sometime next week. Izuku began packing up his stuff once the group had left to return to their respective apartments. He was about to leave but noticed that Osamu's father was leaning against the veranda, still clearly waiting for him. "Oh, you need something still?" Izuku paused, realizing that he never got Osamu's last name or the man's name either. "Just call me Zuki Kid," the man interjected, tossing the butt of his cigarette on the ground and crushing it under his foot. Then he walked over to him. "Listen, I don't have much other than the bastard," he commented, rubbing the back of his neck. "Seeing him like that ain't exactly something that happens every day either. So let me give you some advice," Zuki said, then stared down at him with a very dark look. "If you know what's good for you, you'll stay the hell out of Yokohama," Zuki sternly told him. Izuku stuttered back, shocked at the man's sudden turn. Zuki rolled his eyes. "You may be sheltered for a two-toes, but I'm sure you know there are places that two-toes like you just can't go, right?" he responded, and Izuku nodded, remaining silent. He knew some places banned quirkless people whether they were open about it or not. He had even been chased out of a shop once when he was 6 and didn't know better. "Well, unless you want to disappear off the face of the earth without any trace that you ever existed, you stay the fuck out of Yokohama," Zuki warned, pointing a finger menacingly at Izuku, making him audibly gulp. "You'll learn sooner or later that there's a reason two-toes like you should just keep moving," he added ominously. What do you mean?" Izuku asked, voice trembling, and Zuki scoffed. "You're no dumbass, brat. Haven't you heard of the story of he who takes?" he questioned, and Izuku highly believed that it was rhetorical since he seriously doubted that anyone in this day and age didn't know of that story. He who takes was a quirk-era boogeyman, and there were probably many similar stories in different countries. It was only natural that with the rise of quirks that scary stories of someone who could take them would pop up eventually. Izuku could even remember being thrown jabs about he who takes being the reason he was quirkless when he was younger. Well, old wives' tales like that always have a speck of truth to them, and let's just say that two-toes that are around he who takes have always had a way of disappearing. "You understand what I'm saying?" Zuki asked. I think so," Izuku muttered back, and the brunette nodded to himself. "Good. 'Cause if you break the bastard's heart by being stupid and sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, I'll find some way to bring you back and kill you myself, two-toes or not," the man threatened, glaring down at Izuku before he went to the apartment building. Izuku, feeling rather confused and nervous by the surprise confrontation, scurried back to his hotel to finally check in. But even after he had dinner and a talk with his mom, Zuki's words stuck out in his mind. His travel plans didn't include going to Yokohama this time around, but after what he'd said, Izuku might never go there. He wasn't sure if he believed that he who takes was the reason behind all the disappearances of quirkless people, but he could easily believe that Yokohama could be more dangerous for a quirkless person than other places in Japan. However, Izuku did pause to consider the idea of someone having a quirk that could take another person's quirk. He had seen people occasionally discuss the topic, but it was always quickly dismissed before any real discussion of the possibility could be held. They gave a lot of reasons, but each of them sounded more like excuses to him. Because Izuku thought the ability to take quirks would be very possible, there were plenty of quirks that could bend or break the laws of reality, and there were quirks that could copy other quirks or affect another person's quirk, so he didn't understand why so many people were adamant it was impossible. He considered that it might have to be something to do with him being quirkless. Izuku was well aware that the scariest thing of he who takes was that he could take your quirk, but that clearly was an empty threat for someone quirkless like him. Sure, Izuku knew that the person could have any number of terrifying quirks, but the man's greatest threat was in a way disconnected from him. With that in mind, he didn't understand why he who takes would want with someone quirkless, because what would there be to gain from someone quirkless? Izuku supposed it would only make sense if you took the smaller subset of stories that spin he who takes being able to give and take quirks instead of just taking them. Said variant was a bit harder for Izuku to believe, but still in the realm of possibility. But that wouldn't explain why the quirkless just disappeared if they got quirks by making deals with the devil, and why would quirkless people be told to avoid him? Maybe he who takes just kills them, but why? What would anyone gain from killing a bunch of quirkless people, because wouldn't that just be a waste of time? Full of questions about the old story, he decided to look into it online because it wouldn't hurt to be a bit more informed about it. Of course, there were a few places that briefly spoke about the story or the nursery rhymes of he who takes, but actually finding where the story came from was proving to be very difficult. Izuku was admittedly frustrated when he found a fourth paper about how the story could have started and nothing about how it did. Not even something benign like confusion over a quirk that would have been like Eraserheads. He was about at the end of his rope, so he did something he normally wouldn't. He turned back to the 5th page of his search engine and clicked on the link for the MLA site. He normally reframed from anything to do with the Meta Liberation Army given their views on the quirkless, but they had been around longer than All Might and had some pretty powerful quirk favoring ideals, so they might have some narrative on he who takes that the mainstream media didn't. And holy hell did he hit the motherlode of knowledge. The MLA had a much different view of he who takes and even gave him a name where most stories didn't, brother, all for one. Apparently, it was in reference to a pre-quirk story of the Three Musketeers whose motto was all for one and one for all. The site spoke of he who takes as if he was a real person who was born back during the dawn of the quirk era, and it even went as far as to have accredited him as a founder of the original MLA that had started the Mutant Rebellion which kickstarted the first of the 3 quirk wars. It also leaned heavily into the dealer side of he who takes stories and regaled Izuku about how he offered people a new chance at life by taking, giving, or swapping quirks. Almost instinctively, all of what he had previously been taught made Izuku want to say it was all BS made up by some crackpot in the MLA, but the way it was written gave him pause, as a lot of the arguments to be made could easily be solved by the man's supposed quirk. If such an influential man existed, why wasn't there any record of him? Well, as they say, history is written by the victor, who would have been he who takes, and the only people who would have been around to contest were long past dead, as the few immortals that had lived at the beginning of the quirk era were dead from a quirk loophole in their immortality or infants. Why wouldn't he who takes take credit for all the work he did to free his fellow mutants, as quirked people were called back then? Well, that's only assuming the man was wholly a good person and history was sadly chock full of horrid people who took advantage of war and disasters to do awful things. If such a quirk existed, then it surely would have been recorded somewhere, right? But he who takes could easily pass off someone else's quirk as his own and destroy any records of himself with any number of the quirks that popped up in the 3 centuries between then and now, leaving nothing but old horror stories passed on as cautionary tales for misbehaving kids. If such a man did exist, surely he would be dead by now and not be what Zuki was trying to warn him about. Except the man could steal any quirk in existence, in Asia has only had one semi-immortality quirk on record in the 300 years quirks have existed when the international average was 3 per continent. Honestly, the more Izuku thought of it, the more and more it made sense and horribly realistic it was to him. Hundreds of thousands of people disappeared or mysteriously died even before quirks existed. Who in the world would notice if someone started killing people for their quirks if there wasn't any way to determine if someone still had a quirk after death? Much less check for such a thing? Why would someone bitter from the world choose to be a part of it anymore when they could live however they want as a myth of man and take any powerful ability in all of existence? Why would a person treated like a horrid rabid creature by the quirkless majority of 3 centuries ago not hold an unspeakable grudge against the quirkless? Feeling like he was losing himself to quickly spiraling thought of terrible things, Izuku all but slammed his laptop closed. He found himself trembling as he got up from his bed to check for a 4th time that night that all of the room's locks were shut tight. Maybe Izuku was being paranoid after a late-night info binge, but as he, and probably many other quirkless people that lived to 10 years old had found, paranoia could be your worst friend at the best of times and your best ally in the worst times. Zuki's warning of Yokohama and his brief research of he who takes had understandably left an overthinker like Izuku rattled the next morning, and his mom picked up on it when he called during breakfast. "I'm fine, Mom. Just a really bad dream last night," he skittishly told her, which was only a half-truth instead of a full-on lie, since he did have a vivid nightmare of he who takes and what he might do to someone quirkless. He told her of the stupid dream knowing that hiding it would only make him more suspicious. He let her coo and reassure him as best she could from behind a screen. The words, despite his mom's best attempts, rang hollow in his mind when compared to his knowledge of what was and wasn't possible with quirks. Izuku previously held excitement had melted to lukewarm anxiety, and he wasn't able to enjoy the ferry ride like he had hoped he could. The existential dread of the possibility of he who takes being real hung overhead despite any attempts he made to force it away. Izuku was able to mask his troubling thoughts when he taught children of an orphanage in one of the districts. But in Couchi's red light districts he had met another quirkless person, a woman in her 50s, that gave him more ominous warnings about more cities he should avoid. She had been generous enough after he gave her some money to mark on a map where he couldn't go before. She left to catch a train. Izuku's return to the Shizuoka prefecture the next day was relieving and somber. He happily embraced his mom when he made it home since she had taken a lighter shift to welcome him in person. Izuku was much more comfortable doing his coursework back in his own home with his mom to talk to as he did, desperately avoiding any mention of the topic of he who takes. He talked with her about things he'd need for his next trip to Niigata and Hokkaido, stuff to leave behind that he hadn't needed, and talking about what they should do that Sunday before he left to visit the districts in his local area, and she went to work. Since he was much closer to Niigata and had visited once before, Izuku found himself welcomed in the 5 districts he visited that day. Talking with them, and he met a few other quirkless people. They were just passing through, but speaking with them had helped him learn more about places he shouldn't go to for different reasons, people that wouldn't hesitate to oust him as a two-toes at best, places to avoid like the plague, and places where they as quirkless just weren't welcome. Izuku knew of some places from the woman that they didn't know to avoid and quickly shared with them using the map. He had also marked the areas they said to stay away from. He made sure to thank them for their help, but they brushed it off, saying two toes just stuck together as Zuki had said. When he finished the lessons for that day, he contemplated asking around for more information about he who takes when his phone dinged. Checking it, he saw a text from Yuri-san and began to type up a reply to him. Yuri-san had been infrequently texting him since they talked over dinner that one time. It usually started out about Yukiko-chan or his daughter Anya-san, and often he found himself drifting off to some kind of tangent about something he was learning. Yuri-san didn't seem to be angry when he went off on a rant, and he even chipped in sometimes. Yuri-san surprisingly knew a lot about how quirks changed over the years. But since Izuku was back in the area, Yuri-san wanted to know if they could meet up for a bit. Izuku could see the time on his phone, and he had maybe 2 hours before he had to be home, and he texted as such. He was surprised when he got a location that was really close by, but that didn't stop him from heading to where the location was to meet with Yuri-san. Izuku didn't expect a big fancy restaurant like the last time, since the location was only just outside the district, but that being said, he also wasn't thinking that he'd be headed to a nightclub either. He almost wanted to text Yuri-san to double-check like he did at the restaurant. He searched up the address separately to make sure it was the same place. Unsurprisingly, he was in the right place, and for a moment Izuku questioned not if he could go into a nightclub, but if he wanted to. He hadn't heard anything particularly bad that made them worse than the red light districts. But Izuku was unsure he wanted to be around drunk people, as they could be unpredictable and there would likely be an entrance fee. After a moment of thought, he decided to bite the bullet and moved to get in line, but was stopped by a man in a suit. He asked, yes. Do you need something? Izuku questioned back. A bit unnerved, the man knew his name. The man told him as he grabbed Izuku's arm and dragged him to the front of the line. The only reason Izuku refrained from protesting was that he was 90% sure the man was taking him to Yuri-san. As he expected, they were given some dark looks as they basically cut to the front, and the bouncer was giving them both an unimpressed look back of the line. The bouncer gruffly said, and the man sighed. The man responded, presumably explaining something. At least that's what Izuku put together from the words he did know. The bouncer groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose, but stepped aside to let them pass. Izuku felt a bit bad for cutting the line, especially since he caught some of what the people were grumbling about them. He couldn't linger on the thought, though, as upon entering the soft music, he could hear from outside got much louder and was almost blinded by the flashing lights. Inside the building was kind of what he expected from pre-quirk media. A bar across one wall, mostly dark inside other than colored flashing lights. A second level he couldn't see much of past the railing, a dance floor full of people and music. The club was certainly not anything like any place he had ever been to before. He didn't know what song was currently playing, but he couldn't say he disliked it. A tug on his arm brought his attention back to the man as he began to lead him again. Izuku silently followed the man to a stairwell to the second level. The upper level was a touch calmer, but he still closely trailed behind the man to not get lost, because he doubted he could find Yuri-san on his own, even with how distinct Yuri-san looked. Only about a minute after they got to upper level, the man brought him to a table that was more isolated, and Izuku was quite relieved to finally see Yuri-san. Yuri-san gave him a soft smile. Yuri-san greeted as warmly as a stoic person could as he motioned Izuku to come closer. I hope Valentine has been good to you. He added, patting the spot next to him. He's great. Izuku said, assuming Yuri-san meant the man that led him here. He quickly told Valentine before moving to sit near Yuri-san. Valentine just nodded in turn. Do you want anything? Yuri-san inquired, but Izuku shook his head. And no thanks, Yuri-san. I'm good. He told him. Yuri-san nodded, dismissing Valentine with a wave of the hand. Now, alone with Yuri-san, Izuku admittedly felt himself relax somewhat. Yuri-san called, and the greenette didn't need to turn to know the man was concerned, but seeing it did relieve him to some degree. Has something happened? You seem tense. Yuri-san asked, apparently noticing Izuku's change in demeanor. His shoulders slumped. Is it that obvious? He replied, slightly defeated and wondering if his mom also knew he wasn't all there. No. I simply have a good grasp on body language, but that is hardly the point. What has been troubling you? Yuri-san answered. Izuku hesitated as he pondered whether or not he should really confide in the man. Yuri-san was in a morally gray area between acquaintance and friend. It had been nearly a decade since he made a friend, but he was pretty sure they weren't made that fast. Deciding that, even if they weren't that close, he had nothing to lose, Izuku turned to Yuri-san. I met someone in Kumamoto that Told me something, he explained, fiddling with his sleeve. Oh, what did they tell you? Yuri-san inquired, head tilted, and Izuku rubbed his neck. Well, he told me that I shouldn't go anywhere near Yokohama. Unless I wanted to disappear. Izuku elaborated, and Yuri-san's eyes narrowed. Ah, was he threatening you? Yuri-san questioned, and Izuku quickly brought his hands up and waved them. No. He was just trying to warn me about something. He corrected, and Yuri-san raised an eyebrow a bit. Warn you about what exactly? He prodded. Izuku hesitated again because he thought of what to say. Should I just say it was about he who takes? Would that seem silly to him? Being scared of the possibility that an old fairy tale was real? Would Yuri-san even know about he who takes? Well, he probably does, but probably not by the same name. What was the Russian version of he who takes again? Would I sound like some conspiracy theorist if I told him about MLA's story of all for one **? Izuku was ripped from his thoughts by a sudden drop in the room temperature to something that could only be considered frigid. Turning to Yuri-san, he saw frost had built upon not only on the plastic cup Yuri-san held but everywhere his body was physically touching. Yuri-san's face was also the most expressive he's ever seen, and the emotion wasn't a positive one. Where did you hear that name? Yuri-san questioned, his entire body as tense as his voice. Izuku must have been mumbling, but that wasn't his biggest worry because apparently, Yuri-san did know of he who takes, and the threat became even more real since Yuri-san's demeanor became so rigid. Why, you mean all for one? Izuku asked for clarification, and the temperature drop swiftly got worse. Where did you hear that name? Yuri-san coldly repeated, and Izuku's gut twisted. I found it online. IW was trying to look into he who takes after I was warned about him. Izuku answered, body shivering from the cold. Yuri-san sharply inhaled, and he ran a hand through his hair, then let out a large thick cloud of condensation. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Yuri-san sternly told him. Izuku swallowed the massive lump in his throat and nodded. I think we both know who I am and what I do? Yes? He stated, and Izuku reluctantly nodded. The Greenette had tried looking into Yuri-san after their second meeting because someone that rich and powerful had to have some kind of media presence, right? And Izuku did find Yuri-san. He found article upon article of how the Russian government had tried for decades to tie Yuri-san to the biggest Russian mafia organization in recorded history, of countless lawsuits against Yuri-san where he had been acquitted due to a lack of evidence or witnesses being discredited. Hell, he even found a thread on a conspiracy theory board about Yuri-san being a part of the first generation of heroes in Russia was why no one could convict him. Why, yeah. Izuku timidly admitted, briefly wondering if it was a bad thing to be acquainted with the man or if he was a bad person, since Izuku was fairly sure that Yuri-san was absolutely the head of some criminal organization. Well, when someone like me has been around for as long as I have, you learn things most don't, including when to keep your mouth shut and your nose out of it, he informed him, moving closer to Izuku. I'll tell you everything I know about all for one, but you need to swear to me that not one word of what I say to you will ever leave this table. Yuri-san offered, and Izuku's heart dropped to his stomach. Not at the ultimatum, but the fact that Yuri-san was taking this seriously meant that there was something for Izuku to actually be afraid of, and his overing wasn't blowing this out of proportion. I swear, Izuku whispered. Yuri-san sighed, condensation again falling from his mouth in a thick cloud, and he reined in the chill he had unintentionally made. As Yuri-san went on to explain just who all for one was, Izuku couldn't say he felt any better by the end of their talk. Then again, who would feel great about learning someone who's been around for nearly 3 centuries with a massive grudge against them solely for being born quirkless, and that he had any number of powerful quirks at his disposal? Oh, and he just so happens to be a criminal mastermind with ties to just about every major criminal organization in Japan. At least he could have this existential crisis in the safety and comfort of his own bed when he got home. Izuku partially regretted listening to what Yuri-san knew of he who takes, or all for one as he was more widely known to the Japanese underground. Then again, he wasn't sure how anyone was supposed to handle learning a literal ancient evil was real. But as he drove home, he couldn't help questioning how all for one had remained so well hidden for so long. Even if he stuck to the shadows like Yuri-san explained, there was no way with a countrywide network as he supposedly has that the government didn't know about him, and if they did, why hasn't anyone blown the whistle on this and have an international warning sent out? Because all for one was clearly a global threat to everyone just from what little Yuri-san knew of him. There would be no way for any one hero to take him down, and all for one would be a threat to everyone, not just the quirkless. Izuku severely doubted that All Might could handle all for one, number one hero or not. Izuku was still troubled by the thought of how easily all for one remained hidden in the open. When he got home, he automatically fell into autopilot and just went through the motions, moving around the kitchen without problems considering how often he had worked with multiple injuries previously. Izuku! Inko called, making him jolt, and he turned from the peppers he was cutting to his mom. Hi mom. Did you just get home? He greeted, mentally chastising himself for being so caught up in his thought. Izuku, I've been calling you for the last minute, she told him, her concern obvious as she walked over to him. Izuku's eyes fell to the peppers he was cutting as he avoided eye contact. Oh, I'm sorry, Mom. He tried to apologize, rubbing the back of his neck, only to stop when he felt a hand on his shoulder and turned back to his mom. Izuku. What's wrong? She asked. He immediately pulled away and waved his hands. And nothing is wrong, Mom. I was just he responded, panicking slightly. Izuku, Inko interrupted with a knowing tone, you know you can tell me anything, right? She said, and Izuku's shoulders slumped. He turned his body away from his mom. It's really not that big of a deal. I just met a two toes in Kumamoto, he explained, choosing to throw the whole he who takes all for one problem as far as he could from this conversation. Oh, what were they like? She asked, intrigued herself by the prospect. He was a lot like Emmy, actually, Izuku admitted. Osamu-kun just turned 10, and he wants to help people by becoming a doctor. Izuku elaborated, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. It just reminded me of my dream of being a hero, he told her, and Inko responded a soft I see. He sighed, Mom, I just want to help people. And seeing so many people living like they do in the districts just hurts. Izuku confessed, feeling tears pricking the corners of his eyes. He hugged himself after unintentionally telling her about his feelings about the other thing on his mind. The way his chest felt painfully tight whenever he thought about the sometimes awful living conditions some of his students lived, and learning that they weren't so uncommon when he visited the other red light districts. It had been temporarily pushed aside from his mind in the wake of the danger from All for One. Izuku flinched when he felt a hand cup his face, but let it turn him back to his mom and saw her sad smile. Oh, Izuku. There's nothing wrong with how you're feeling. You've always had a heart that was just a bit too big for your own good. Inko cooed, rubbing her thumb on his cheek, and it's okay to be sad or disappointed about not pursuing your dream. She added, hand moving from his face to his arm. Izuku ducked his head, looking away from her again as an odd prickly feeling formed in his chest when she said that. The part of him that wanted to be a hero would probably never fully disappear, but the Southside Inferno had firmly ripped his rose-tinted view of heroics away from him, and while the other 20 red light districts he had been to weren't as bad as the Southside, it hadn't helped his changing opinion on the heroics profession. But Izuku, personally speaking, ever since January, I think you've become something so much better than a hero. Inko confessed, much to Izuku's shock. What? He questioned, utterly gobsmacked. She smiled back at him. Heroes do a lot for a lot of people. And maybe there are some exceptions, but heroes don't stick around long after their job is done, she told him, struggling to find the words to properly explain. Once the villain is defeated or the disaster cleaned up, they move on to the next problem, leaving the victims to deal with the aftermath on their own. The most they'll usually do is pay for the damage they see caused or donate money to charities. She elaborated, and Izuku knew she was right about limelight heroes anyway, even if it hurt to admit to that fact to himself. But what you're doing right now, you're doing so much more for them. You're helping them survive day to day and giving them the chance to make their lives better by teaching everything you can know. Izuku, what you've done for those people, what you'll continue doing for them, they'll never forget that, she said, not bothering to hide the pride in her voice as she did, making Izuku a bit flustered. You don't need a plastic card to change someone's life, Izuku. You're already doing that. And even though it means I can't see you as much and I'm utterly terrified that you might get hurt one day, that will never change how proud I am of the man you're becoming, Inko told him with confidence and certainty she rarely possessed. Upon finishing her speech, Izuku felt big fat Midoriya family tears pouring from his eyes, completely overwhelmed by the emotions dredged up from his mother's words. Mom. He whimpered, wondering for what was probably the 1,000th time what he had done to deserve such a wonderful person for a mother. Inko smiled at him softly and reached for his face with both hands, then brought his forehead to hers, letting him get it all out as he cried, then gave him her work hanky. Izuku was still trying to put himself back together into something resembling a functioning member of society when his mom loudly clapped her hands. I think it's been too long since we had a pizza night, so we should do that tonight, she declared with a determined look on her face. But I've already started cutting peppers for stir fry, Izuku pointed out. We'll just put it on the pizza. I've always wanted to try peppers on pizza, Inko cheerfully responded, but it's the spicy peppers. And we don't have any dough, Izuku countered. Then we'll just have to make it from scratch, she replied, unbothered by the fact and not addressing the peppers. Mom. Izuku whined in protest but couldn't stop himself from smiling as she left the kitchen to change out of her scrubs. When Inko returned, the two of them got to work making pizza together, listening to hand-up radio as they did, singing along when a song they liked came on, and Izuku had even been prompted to dance along with her for one. Neither of them were very good at either, but Izuku couldn't deny that it was fun to do after all the stress of the past few days, and as the pizza baked in the oven, Izuku and Inko transformed the living room into a pillow fort again. Later, both Izuku and Inko were wrapped up in blankets watching Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, one of Izuku's favorite movies, and eating a slice of pizza. The danger of all for one hadn't left Izuku's mind, but his mom's attempt to cheer him up had certainly helped to melt away the weight on his shoulders, and for the first time since Kumamoto, Izuku felt himself start to actually relax. Izuku sighed, leaning back against the couch, content with good food in his stomach and wrapped up in a fluffy blanket. Turning to his mom, he couldn't help feeling really grateful for everything she had done for him. "Hey, Mom," he said, and she turned to him with a soft hum of acknowledgement. "Thank you for everything you've done for me. You're the greatest, Mom," Izuku told her as he snuggled up to her. She chuckled softly and ruffled Izuku's hair. "What are you talking about, Izuku?" Inko asked with a hint of amusement in her tone. "Visiting the other districts reminded me how lucky I am to have someone amazing as you in my life," he answered, moving closer to her, and Inko smiled back. "You're too kind to me, Izuku," she responded by kissing his forehead. "I'm just trying to do what's best for you," she said modestly as she averted her eyes. "And I'm going to tell how incredible you are for that," Izuku replied, hugging her and burying his head in her chest, making Inko laugh. Hugging him back. "Oh, Izuku," she exclaimed, making Izuku's heart feel even lighter, even then burst into tears. It was fine. They were happy tears. Tomorrow Izuku would be leaving for Nagata and worry about the ever-looming issue of all for one being real meant for him and his future work in the red light districts. But that would be a problem for future Izuku to deal with. For now, though, he was going to enjoy a movie, eat the pizza he made, and relax with his mom in the little bubble of peace, feeling like he was miles away from his troubles as he steadfast ignored the rest of the world. Just for a little while. That's the 8th part finished. If you want to catch up on the earlier chapters, head to the playlist. Please remember to support the author. I'll be back with more soon. Thanks for being awesome.